Picture this. It's 2013. Think back to where you were in life. Maybe you were playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Maybe you weren't playing it and were playing sports or going to school. Maybe you were trying to kick it with that hot guy or girl that you had been crushing on for God knows how long. Well, whatever you were doing, if it didn't involve playing against Dragon Rulers from 2013 to 2014, congratulations, you dodged a damn bullet. My name is Avery, and it is time to discuss one of, if not the, most hated format for me personally, but yet also one of the most skillful formats in Yu-Gi-Oh! History. This is a Dragon Ruler format, Retrospective.
これがバリアンの力だ。ランクアップマジックだと驚くのはまだ早い。権限せよナンバーズ107ギャラクシーアイズタキオンドラゴン。さあデュエル。遊戯王ゼアオフィシャルカードゲームロード・オブ・ザ・タキオン・ギャラクシー2月16日発売。ルールを守って楽しくデュエル。コナミ。
So before we dive into the madness that was Dragon Rulers, we need to set the stage a bit so that you can fully understand why these dragons forever changed Yu-Gi-Oh! The March 2013 Forbidden List would bring a significant change to the format by eliminating windups. The deck lost its last copy of Windup Carrier Mighty and got Windup Magician, one of its key playmakers, limited. This was primarily done because the September 2013 Forbidden List format had seen constant tops by windups in spite of the limiting of Windup Carrier Mighty. The list also notably saw Sangam move to Forbidden, killing what had been the primary target for Tour Guide. The resulting format was mostly between Mermails and Fire Fists, with Mermails having a clear advantage. As Mermails continued their dominance of the meta, two distinct variations of the deck started to emerge: G-Nex Mermails and Mono Mermail. G-Nex Mermail utilized 3 copies of G-Nex Undyne and a single copy of G-Nex Controller. G-Nex Undyne allowed for the various different Mermail and Atlantean effects to be more easily triggered directly from the deck. This variant of the deck definitely focused more on triggering the effects of the Atlantean monsters over spamming the board with the more powerful high-level Mermails. Mono Mermails, on the other hand, played a much fuller Mermail monster lineup. The result of this was much easier swarming capabilities and, by extension, much easier access to the powerful and emerging Rank 7 Xyz pool, which at this point mainly included Mermail Abyss Gaios and number 11 Big Eye. Other decks from the previous year's format, such as Dino Rabbit and Heroes, also managed to steal some tops despite the format shift. The Macro Rabbit variant that had rose to prominence saw continual event tops throughout the format due to Macrocosmos' effectiveness against Mermails, making the deck something of an anti-meta force. Heroes also saw more play in this format under a new variant called Bubble Beat. This version of the deck had dropped the Gemini monsters in favor of a focus on Bubble Man and making Rank 4 Xyz monsters. Bubble Beat managed to win 1 YCS during the March 2013 format and get a few scattered tops at regionals throughout the format. The last major deck of the format was a resurgent gadget deck. Robbie Cole, eat your heart out. Machina Gadgets had been stealing occasional tops at various events since they first came onto the scene years earlier, but had fallen somewhat out of favor after Xyz took over the meta. The deck would soon come to take full advantage of Xyz monsters, however, easily being able to flood the board with rank 4 Xyz monsters thanks to the potency of Ultimate Offering with the deck. Both the older Machina variant and the somewhat more recent Synchro-focused Kara Curry variant of gadgets both saw substantial success at various regionals throughout the format, as well as some minor success at the YCS events of the format. The playing field of the March 2013 Forbidden List meta would prove to be short-lived, as the release of the booster set Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy in May would blow all older decks out of the water. Keep these old decks in mind as you watch this video, because this set is truly that impactful. Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy began a new era of the game and also started the most infamous format in all of Yu-Gi-Oh's history, Dragon Ruler format. The Dragon Rulers were a set of 4 monsters, all of which were level 7 dragons that could summon themselves from the hand or graveyard by banishing 2 other dragons or monsters of the same attribute as the Dragon Ruler. They all also had an ability they could trigger by discarding themselves and another monster of the same attribute from hand. Finally, they all allowed another dragon of their same attribute to be searched when they got banished, including another copy of that same Dragon Ruler. These factors combined together to make a deck that was faster, more powerful, and more consistent than anything that had ever come before it. Dragon Rulers were able to banish other Dragon Rulers to summon themselves, then causing those banished Dragon Rulers to search out additional copies of themselves, thus maintaining complete card advantage. To put this in current format terms, imagine if Sword Soul had a way to drop Baroness and Chang Ying and search out any 2 Sword Soul monsters along with the effects that already trigger when summoning both of these synchro monsters, and even then, that's probably putting it lightly. To top it all off, there were lower level equivalents to all of the Dragon Rulers, otherwise known as the baby dragons, as well, that made summoning them from the deck even easier. The true power of the Dragon Ruler deck didn't rely on the monsters themselves, but instead on the extra deck monsters that they facilitated summoning. This primarily included rank 7 Xyz monsters and some level 8 Synchro monsters. The 2 rank 7 Xyz monsters that were most prominently associated with the deck were Mecha Phantom Beast Dracosac and number 11 Big Eye. Dracosac was notable for having a combination of high attack, the ability to establish board presence, a destruction effect, and protection from destruction to top it all off. Big Eye, on the other hand, gave the deck utility by stealing an opponent's monster, simultaneously dismantling an opponent's board while also getting the opponent's powerful monster effects. Just imagine in the mirror match. Yeah, that was insane, because you could go number 11 Big Eye, take your Big Eye, use that Big Eye to take another Big Eye, and then just using the third Big Eye to take, I don't know, whatever monster you want. The level 8 Synchro monsters that the deck often had access to through the use of Flamevale Guard or Dragunity Corseska included many of the most powerful level 8 Synchro monsters from the 5Ds era, including Stardust and Scrap Dragon and the newer Crimson Blader. This wide variety of extremely powerful boss monsters helped make the deck a very formidable force. The deck also had incredible draw power in the form of 3 cards, Sacred Sword of 7 stars, Super Rejuvenation, and Gold Sarcophagus. Both Gold Sark and Sacred Sword thinned the deck and banished Dragon Rulers to get their searches, while Super Rejuvenation allowed a Dragon Ruler player to draw through their deck and replenish their hand at the end of the turn. While Sacred Sword was used throughout the format, early on it didn't see universal play, and when it was played, it was often only run at 1 or 2 copies. The other main tech for Dragon Rulers was Light and Darkness Dragon, one of my personally favorite cards of all time. This card saw a resurgence in play due to the ability for it to be searched from the deck by banishing Eclipse Wyvern, as well as the ease with which Dragon Rulers could use themselves and Dracosac tokens to generate tribute fodder. While Light and Darkness Dragon never quite saw widespread adoption during the format, it did see success with the winning decks at the Oceanic, Polish, and Mexican World Championship qualifiers. The final tech of the format came with the adoption of a card previously used primarily in side decks as a main deck choice, Vanity's Emptiness. This card, which had been seen as largely useless prior to the Dragon Ruler format, rose to prominence due to its potency to shut an opponent out of playing in the Dragon Ruler mirror match. The factor that gave the card this was primarily that Dragon Rulers all summon themselves by card effects, meaning that Vanity's Emptiness could be chained to the Dragon Ruler's attempted summon and then stop that summon, subsequently wasting the resources used for the aborted summon and locking the opponent out of establishing board presence. Furthermore, the condition for Vanity's Emptiness's destruction made it relatively easy for Dragon Rulers to remove it from their own field on their turn, allowing them to then continue special summoning. While Vanity's Emptiness would clearly show itself as an extremely powerful choice for Dragon Rulers, this card wouldn't see mainstream adoption until near the end of the format, and I vaguely remember the card being a couple dollars at most, and then it rose up to over $50 as a common from Starstrike Blast. Dragon Rulers made short work in the meta, almost entirely pushing out all other decks within the span of a few weeks. Soon enough, the only decks that could compete were either Dragon Rulers or decks specifically designed to counter Dragon Rulers. There were 2 major decks that fell into this latter category, Spellbooks and Evil Swarm. Spellbooks were a primarily spell-based deck that relied on extremely high consistency for getting to their power card, Spellbook of Judgment. This card allowed a Spellbook player to end their turn by replenishing their hand to full size with new Spellbook spells, as well as special summon a spellcaster from the deck. The one that was most often chosen was Jowgen the Spiritualist, as he was able to shut off special summoning, something which Dragon Rulers relied heavily on. Furthermore, Spellbooks had access to Spellbook of Fate, which could banish an opponent's monster, making it difficult to get rid of Jowgen. The other prominent anti-Dragon Ruler decks at the time was Evil Swarm. The point of Evil Swarm was similar to Spellbooks, in that it focused on getting out their Xyz monster, Evil Swarm Ophion, or Evil Swarm Ophion, however you prefer to say it, as fast as possible. Ophion stopped the summoning of level 5 or higher monsters, which shut off Dragon Rulers. Evil Swarm also had an easy way to protect its boss monster with Infestation Pandemic that Ophion could search with his own effect. This gave Ophion protection from being removed from the board by cards such as Dark Hole and Spellbook of Fate, or from being flipped face down by Book of Moon. Something interesting to note about this format was the lack of YCS events. The last YCS event held in the TCG before the various World Championship qualifiers for the year occurred the weekend before the release of Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy, meaning that Dragon Rulers were not yet legal for play at the event. As such, the main tournaments where Dragon Rulers were shining were the various different World Championship qualifiers that occurred. While Dragon Rulers definitely dominated the majority of top spots and wins, Evil Swarms and Spellbooks did manage to seize a significant number of tops and wins at these events, with Spellbooks even taking first place over Dragon Rulers at the European World Championship qualifier. The format finally ended with the release of the September 2013 Forbidden List, which was one of the largest Forbidden lists released so far, especially in terms of number of decks that received hits. It is also important to note that this Forbidden List was the first to officially diverge from the OCG. Previously, all Forbidden and Limited lists had been released for both regions, but the September 2013 list denoted an official divergence between the two metagames. To address Dragon Rulers, all of the baby Dragon Rulers, Super Rejuvenation and Card Destruction, another consistency card for the deck, were forbidden and Gold Sark was limited. Dragon Rulers weren't the only deck hit on this list, however. Spellbooks lost Spellbook of Judgment, Mermails got Dragoons and Deep Sea Diva limited. Fire Fist got Brotherhood of the Fire Fist Spirit limited and Fire Formation Tenki semi-limited, and Gadgets got both Shockmaster and Ultimate Offering forbidden. Two older decks, Six Samurai and Bubble Beat, also got key consistency cards hit to prevent them from truly making a comeback. Six Samurai saw Gateway of the Six forbidden, while Bubble Beat saw Elemental Hero Stratos forbidden. Leave a comment down below if you were one of the people saying free my man Stratos. The result of this list was Spellbooks falling from the top tier of the meta and Dragon Rulers seemingly becoming beatable. However, Dragon Rulers would adapt and maintain their spot as the best deck. This was largely due to the continued power of the core Dragon Ruler cards, in addition to the simultaneous weakening of any of the possible competitor decks that could have pushed Dragon Rulers out of their top spot. Keep the word adapt in your head throughout this video because Dragon Rulers were really good at that back in the day. The main hybrid of Dragon Rulers that appeared after the September list was referred to as Ravine Rulers. This variant relied on using the field spell Dragon Ravine to very quickly fill the graveyard with Dragon Ruler monsters, while also being able to search out the various Dragoonity tuner monsters to make easy synchro plays. The variant of the deck was further enhanced by a newly released trap card, Sixth Sense. Sixth Sense had been released many years earlier in the OCG and had been on the Forbidden section of the Forbidden and Limited list for as long as there had been one, but it was new to the TCG in fall of 2013. The card allowed for huge amounts of advantage to easily be accumulated by letting a player either draw a large number of cards or mill a large number of cards, both results being optimal for Dragon Rulers. It was immediately limited, but this was not enough to prevent it from being used in every Dragon Ruler deck. Ravine Rulers also began to exploit Return from the Different Dimension, a card that hadn't seen widespread play since the end of the Dark Arm Dragon format 5 years earlier. Because of these new power cards and Spellbook's inability to now keep up with Dragon Rulers due to the loss of Spellbook of Judgment, Ravine Rulers ended up having an even greater portion of event tops than the full power version that the deck had, with their only serious competition remaining being Evil Swarms. While the first YCS of the format, YCS Toronto, saw Mermails and a variety of other previously rogue decks take a significant portion of the top spots, this can largely be attributed to the format still being young enough that Ravine Rulers hadn't fully solidified in the meta. Once the format coalesced around Ravine Rulers, however, they saw complete and utter dominance of the remaining high-level events of the year, winning almost all of the top spots. There were, however, some rogue decks that managed to survive in this format at the regional level. These included Constellars, Madolche, Mermails, and Fire Fists. Constellars and Madolche were both decks that had come out around the time that Dragon Rulers first entered the meta, so they had no time to shine. They became more relevant at this point because both decks had very easy access to Xyz monsters that could remove an opponent's monsters without banishing or destroying them, something that was particularly relevant with Dragon Rulers' easy access to Dracosac and Stardust Dragon, in addition to the fact that Dragon Rulers could be summoned just as easily from the graveyard as they could from the hand. Dragon Rulers would not continue their reign for long, however, as Konami changed their schedule to have 4 new Forbidden and Limited lists per year, instead of 2 like there had been since 2005. As part of this change, it was announced a new Forbidden and Limited list would take effect on January 1st of 2014. This new Forbidden and Limited list killed the remaining power of Ravine Rulers, specifically targeting all of the deck's power cards. First of all, Sixth Sense, Return from the Different Dimension, and Dragon Ravine were all banned, and Sacred Sword of 7 stars and all 4 Dragon Rulers were limited. Further hits on this list included limiting Spellbook of Fate to make sure Spellbooks would not be able to dominate the power vacuum left by Dragon Rulers. The end of the Dragon Ruler format would spell another major swing in the overall meta of the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG, not unlike that seen at the end of the Dark Armed Dragon era. While the game up to this point had seen many diverse and open metas, the playing field of competitive decks changed relatively slowly, with a new competitive deck usually cropping up only every 2 or 3 months. These decks were also low enough in power that many older decks, such as Six Samurai, Gravekeeper, and Dark Worlds, were able to remain competitive throughout the years. The era that the game was about to shift to would be defined not by singular dominant decks, but instead by a long string of wildly swinging metagames, with whole sets of new decks popping into the competitive scene and disappearing from it just as fast. It's in this era that the modern game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Would appear. Now, with all that being said, let's skip forward to 2014. Even though there were a wide variety of different decks that were able to rise into the meta in place of Dragon Rulers, it is also important to note that Dragon Rulers and Spellbooks were by no means out of the meta entirely. The new variant of Dragon Rulers that started to see play in this January 2014 format, again with the word adapt, was Heraldic Dragon Rulers, which was able to access rank 6 Xyz monsters and synchros with relative ease. It was definitely not as powerful as its previous incarnations, but the deck still managed to gain a decent portion of tops at large events during the period. The focus of the deck was less on the Dragon Rulers as the main strategy, and instead used them as more of an engine to complement the other dragon monsters that the deck used. Spellbooks also saw limited success, but with no Spellbook of Judgment and only a single Spellbook of Fate, they weren't able to see widespread success at higher levels of play. By the end of the January 2014 format, while Fire Fist and Mermails had etched themselves out as the best decks, while they didn't completely oppress the meta like decks had in previous formats, the April 2014 Forbidden list still focused on addressing them. The list limited Coach Soldier Wolfbark and Rekindling for Fire Fist and Mermelic Abyss Gun for Mermails, all of which were powerful playmakers in their respective decks. Infernities also got checked in the form of an Infernity Barrier limit. This hit lowered the extremely potent first turn potential that the deck had, as Infernity Barrier was an easily searchable negation card. Finally, Heraldic Rulers got a hit in the form of a semi-limit to Heraldic Seal of Convocation, dropping the consistency of the variant and making it see less competitive play. As the dust settled after this new Forbidden list, the meta didn't see a massive shift, with the main change being the removal of Fire Fist from the most top cuts. In their place, Yugioh started to surge in dominance, along with a new variant of Dragon Rulers. Do you see where I've been going with this? That would go on to replace the Heraldic Ruler deck from the previous formats. Introducing Mythic Rulers. This variant used 2 newer cards, Mythic Water and Mythic Tree Dragon, along with Blue Eyes White Dragon and the White Stone of Legend. Combined, these cards allowed for a deck that was able to easily access rank 8 Xyz monsters such as Divine Dragon Knight Felgrand and Heraldic Sun Dragon Overlord of Heliopolis. The main card that made this variant of Dragon Rulers work, however, was something released in the April booster set of Dragons of Legend, Soul Charge. Soul Charge allowed for mass exploitation of powerful monsters in the graveyard, meaning that being able to quickly fill the graveyard could be directly translated into huge and powerful boards. Access to Soul Charge also allowed for Infernities to become even more relevant than they had been prior to the April 2014 Forbidden list due to the ease with which they could fill up their graveyard. The rest of this early April 2014 format would see a split of tops between Mythic Rulers, Yugioh, and Mermails, with more minor representation of Boojins and Heraldic Rulers. In late June, however, a new structure deck was released that gave new and updated support for an older competitive archetype, Lightsworn. The most significant new support card was Raiden, Hand of the Lightsworn. Unlike previous Lightsworn cards, which had to wait until the end phase to mill cards, Raiden was able to actively mill during the main phase in addition to the end phase. This, combined with his status as a level 4 tuner, made him a very powerful new addition to the deck. This new support gave rise to yet another new competitive variant of Dragon Rulers, called Lightsworn Rulers. This variant focused itself around using Dragon Rulers to easily banish Eclipse Wyvern to reliably get Judgment Dragon to hand. Which, side note, I played in this format. That build was actually pretty cool, I'm not gonna lie. Except for this addition of Lightsworn Rulers into the meta, the playing field remained relatively the same through the July 2014 Forbidden list. While Hat, otherwise known as Hand Artifact Trap Trick, won a large number of the National World Championship qualifiers, other decks still saw significant success and tops throughout this format, including Madolche and Yugioh, but also Infernities, Boojins, and even Spellbooks. The July list was a very minor list, with its only significant change being a hit to Yugioh, in the form of Yugioh Gear being limited. Yugioh Gear had been the main card that enabled Yugioh to flood the field as easily as they had been, and without it, the deck was no longer able to keep up in the meta. This left Hat the dominant deck going into US Nationals, which it won. This meta wouldn't manage to survive the summer, however, as a new set called Duelist Alliance would bring about a monumental shift in the meta. The release of this set marked the beginning of a new era of the game's history. While many thought initially that this shift would be brought about by pendulums, a new summoning type, much like Xyz and Synchro had been, the shift in the game's meta was more nuanced. Unlike Synchro and Xyz, which had gone on to become the dominant strategies of their eras, Pendulum instead turned out to be simply another part of a much more diverse meta. The new era of Yu-Gi-Oh! That started with Duelist Alliance would see the rise of decks focused not only on the new Pendulum summoning, but also Xyz and Synchro, as well as Fusion and Ritual summoning. Two summoning methods that had previously not seen competitive play for years. The shift in the game would be spearheaded by these powerful new archetypes, all of which were significantly faster and harder to get past than any archetype before, the only exception being the Dragon Rulers themselves. This shift from this Dragon Ruler plus other decks format, as I like to call it, to the Duelist Alliance format would mark once and for all the end of a slower game. The formats prior to Duelist Alliance had largely relied on smaller scale trades and card advantage that built towards one player slowly outpacing the other. This was marked by the prevalence of decks that focused on only summoning one or two monsters in a turn, and the emphasis on traps such as Compulsory Evacuation Device and Bottomless Trap Hole that removed single monsters. The new meta would instead shift towards continuously filling the board with monsters, and the popular traps stopped being one-for-one trades and started to trend more towards being extremely potent floodgates that shut an opponent out of entire game mechanics. Although this shift in power can be argued as having been either very good or very bad for the health of the game, it is undeniable that this shift away from the Xyz era would mark the start of the modern game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And it's all thanks to the Dragon Rulers. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. A lot of research went into this. It took me a lot of time to get this done. I'm sorry that I just did a whole bunch of research. I want to make sure I had everything right. And I hope that you enjoyed it. And obviously I didn't want this video to be an hour long, so that's why I showed deck lists throughout the video, showing how Dragon Rulers evolved. But please let me know what format you want me to cover next. I love doing these videos. Again, thank you for your patience with just waiting on this. You know, I want to make sure I had it right. So thank you guys for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. Help me get to 1,000 subscribers, and I will see you in the next video.